So welcome to the Global Network webinars. My name is Alexander Loschke, and I will be moderating this webinar today together with my colleagues Sean Lovell and Panya Yu. We have with us today our director Stefan Schweinfest and also Amr Nour from the UN Statistics Division, who will speak about beyond GDP, stakes, challenges, and statistical contributions. So for years now, many have advised that the gross domestic product, or GDP, is not a good measure of welfare. The 2008 system of national account itself notes that it is unrealistic, in quotes, it is unrealistic to expect a system of economic account to necessarily and automatically yield a wholly satisfactory measure of welfare, end quotes. As disconnect grew between economic growth and people's perception of peaceful society, well-being, and living condition, calls increased to measure progress and well-being differently. Today's webinar will focus on the beyond gross domestic product developments within the United Nations. It will update on the policy and political developments, including the latest relevant action emanating from the Summit of the Future, which just took place a few weeks ago during the general debate week of the General Assembly of the United Nations. We will talk also about the latest relevant actions, and we will highlight some stakes and challenges relating to beyond GDP, to the beyond GDP agenda. The speakers will elaborate on potential contributions to the process by relevant statistical accounts, frameworks, and work streams. And let me now introduce you to our speakers. With us Amr, who is a principal advisor at UNSD. He's a trained lawyer and economist, specialized in development policy and sustainable development. And he's the focal point of Beyond GDP at UNSD. Prior to his function here at UNSD, he led for more than 12 years the strategic coordination and global policy advice to the 5 UN Regional Economic Commissions as the director of the Regional Commission's New York office. Stefan is the director of the UN Statistics Division since July 2014. And under his leadership, the division compiles and disseminates global statistical information, develops standards and norms for statistical activities, and supports countries' efforts to strengthen their national statistical and geospatial systems. Stefan joined UNSD in 1989 in the area of national accounts and subsequently worked in various other areas. So before we start, I will just make a few practical remarks. So we will first hear the presentation, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end. So during the presentation, please feel free to write your comments and questions into the meeting chat. And then during the Q&A session, we encourage you to ask your question yourself to create a more interactive atmosphere. As always, this global web network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the global network of data officers and statisticians at yammer.com/UNstats. And we invite you to continue the discussions on the global network after the webinar. So now over to you, Amr. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for the introduction and for this opportunity. Let me share my presentation. So just give me a second here.
Sure.
Can you see it?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
All right, excellent. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. My presentation today, as Alex has said, will address the beyond GDP stakes, challenges, and statistical contributions. And as you can see from the outline, we'll try to address why and why now, the political development, as it has been said in the terms of the Pact for the Future, and the framework to progress beyond GDP that has been put on the table by the UN Secretary General. Will go quickly to highlighting some of the challenges to overcome in the process. But really, the main part of the presentation will be really about the statistical sources and contributions that could obviously provide and contribute significantly towards the beyond GDP core set of metrics. And on that, we'll go through the three pillars, the statistical pillars of economic, environment, and social and demographic. We'll also go through some sectoral approaches and contributions as an example, and then also at the national level, possible contributions and examples as well. So without further ado, we'll go to the stakes and what is a stake and the why and why now. Now, as it has been done, as it has been said, I mean, Robert Kennedy in 1968 said that GDP measures everything in short except that which makes life worthwhile. So I think the blind spots of GDP has been known for decades. And as a matter of fact, even in the formalization, since the formalization of the SNA in 1947, this discussion about what GDP can capture and what it does not has been very active and so on. But the blind spots, as we can say, and I'm going to go through them very quickly now, and as I say, they are not new to many, but I think they came up front in the most recent decades. The GDP, as Alex has said, is not a good measurement of welfare. And honestly, it did not pretend to be. So the GDP does not capture, well, the human well-being. And under that, we find some major aspects like time use, standard of living, well-being, community vitality, cultural diversity. All these are outside kind of some of the aspects outside the boundary of the GDP measurement. It doesn't also capture the environmental sustainability, at least fully, all right? And I think the disconnect between economic growth and the environmental degradation has been well known for decades. And you can see just a quote, the global GDP has doubled since 1970, while depletion of resources has more than tripled. And this has been well recognized, as I say, for decades. There is the issue of inequality. Again, the economic growth does not capture this and does not address it in terms of the quality of the growth, all right, in the GDP. The rich goes richer, the poor goes poorer, and it's been going also for decades as a phenomenon. And then there is the informal economy and social value of activities like the unpaid care work, like the healthcare, like the value of security, all right? And we have another quote here, maybe, and another estimate from UNSD actually, and UN Women, where they estimated that the women spend an estimated 512 billion hours globally doing additional unpaid childcare work during COVID-19 pandemic. This has been not captured in the GDP, obviously, and it has not been valued enough, despite its obviously amazing societal contribution. We also knew economic phenomena that arise in the last decade, like digitalization and use of free digital services, the use of crypto assets, development of data, and all this are recognized GDP blind spots. But as I say, this has been known for decades. So why now and why acting now? I think, as it has been said, there has been a disconnect as it grows, and the trust of the people has kind of been lost to the political institutions. And then there was really a measure, if you say in the statistical perspective, users demand really to find new measurements that would really address this loss of trust and this kind of threat really to the systems. All right. In doing so and accompanying this kind of growing loss of trust, if you wish, there has been a lot of landmarks actually which contributed in moving the thinking forward. One of them, I would mention a few of them, is the Brundtland Report 1987, but also Agenda 21, which was the outcome document coming from the Earth Summit in 1992, which clearly highlighted the limitation of GDP in providing adequate indications of sustainability. And that was really in terms of highlighting the detachment, as I say, from the environmental sustainability. There was also the 2008-2009 financial and economic crisis, all right, which put up front again the detachment of the financial system from the real economy. And then came immediately at the same time the report by the Commission on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi report in 2009, where again the limitation of the GDP were put on the table up front, but also provided some feasibility of alternative measurement tools. I would add here also in terms of other developments, the Arab Spring of 2010-2011, where the quality of economic growth and the quality of life came under the spotlight strongly as well. In fact, I personally come from Egypt, and Egypt was performing for years going to the January 2011 revolution at an economic growth of 8 to 10%, one of the top performers of economic growth, but obviously the inequality was growing very strong during the same period, leading to obviously the revolution in Egypt. Tunisia was the same and a similar case as well. And then came the SDG adoption in 2015 and the target 1719, which was really kind of a first indication of a mandate, all right, to go and develop measurements of progress on sustainable development that complement GDP. So all this kind of led really to a political momentum that was sealed obviously by the Secretary General, and that culminated really in the Pact for the Future, which was adopted just last September by the heads of states and governments. And in the Pact of the Future, there was a very specific action, which is called Action 53, where the heads of states and governments committed to develop a framework on measures of progress on sustainable development to complement or go beyond GDP. And as I say, that was just on the 22nd of September of this year. So key elements of this mandate, which is considered the clearest mandate yet at the highest level by the UN to proceed on this agenda, member states reaffirmed again a balanced and integrated approach to the development of such new measurements, the urgency to proceed on this agenda, all right, to go through the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, including in the consideration of informing access to development finance and technical cooperation. And they submitted 2 concrete requests to the Secretary General. One of them is to establish an independent high-level expert group to develop recommendations for a limited number of country-owned and universally applicable indicators of sustainable development that complement or go beyond GDP. And another one is to initiate a UN-led intergovernmental process following the completion of the work of the high-level expert group in consultation with relevant stakeholders. Both requests are going to be done in consultations with the relevant stakeholders, including and build on existing work, including the work of the Statistical Commission. So that's important. Now, moving forward, that mandate was basically guided, if you wish, by a framework, all right, on valuing what counts that was submitted by the UN Secretary General as part of elaborating on his common agenda, all right, to the member states. And that framework to progress beyond GDP, which, as I say, it's the framework on the table now. It's a guiding framework, but it's, of course, the independent high-level panel can go as it will think. But I think it's important to highlight it since it really is, as I say, coming from the UN Secretary General and was the foundation of this mandate in the Pact for the Future. It contains 6 major elements. One of them is the well-being and agency, which is obviously people-centered, the respect for life and the planet-centered, and then the reduced inequality and greater solidarity, and that's related to the distributional aspects and the quality of growth. There is also some elements related to governance and stronger institutions, innovation and ethical economies, which address, among others, technological innovation, obviously, and digitalization and other aspects, and the use of this technology and so on. And then there is the issues of resilience, which is obviously important as well. So that's the conceptual framework with the 6 elements that was put on the table by the UN Secretary General. And I have to highlight here that the Secretary General, in submitting this framework to Progress Beyond GDP, also emphasized that a major capacity building initiative and resourcing initiative would be needed to enable member states to use the new framework effectively. So the capacity building aspect was not absent really in the submission of this framework, in understanding the complexity of what it will bring to the member states and the challenges as well. That would also bring us to the challenges to overcome in this process. And I think I kind of try to put them into 2 aspects. One of them is conceptual and systemic challenges, and one related to measurement challenges. The conceptual and systemic challenges really relating to what I call the change of the mindset from overvaluing economic growth to valuing life, but also accompanying with it is systems transformation. And then there are the kind of well-known measurement challenges to any core set of metrics, especially at this level, which has to be comparable, country-owned, universally applicable, and obviously that has been highlighted in the mandate itself, which was given by member states, but also they have to convey clear messages that are actionable, all right, scientifically robust, and interactive and dynamic. Now, the first kind of intuition would be that maybe the measurement challenges would relate more to the statistical community than the conceptual and systemic, but it's actually not. The fact of the matter is that the conceptual and systemic challenges also relate to the statistical community, and I think I will give some, as we move forward, some good example of how the statistical community in some of the examples had overcome this kind of conceptual and systemic challenges as well. So let's move to the second slide. So give me a second here. So now we'll move to the bigger part really of the presentation, and this is towards the Beyond GDP core set of metrics, the statistical sources and contributions. This slide kind of highlight really kind of in a snapshot of some of the sources, and we can see obviously some of the well-known systems through the 3 pillars, which is the System of National Accounts 2025 SMA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting from the environmental pillar, all right, the social and demographic statistical potential contributions, but there are also some sectoral contribution, as I say, which come from the statistical framework for measurement of sustainable tourism, which I elaborate on. There are also some processes, and then of course there is the bigger foundation of all this, which was explicitly mentioned, obviously, in the mandate, which is the Global Indicators Framework of the SDG. Now, related and backing some of this process are 2 ongoing processes, which is the Friends of Chair of the Social and Demographic Statistics and the Network of Economic Statistics, which had established an expert group of well-being measurement. So let's move to unpack a little bit some of these possible contributions, all right? And I think Alex kind of burned my coat here a little bit about the System of National Accounts. I have to say so far that technically and de jure so far, all right, the 2025 System of National Accounts is still a draft. It will be adopted hopefully formally in next March by the UN Statistical Commission, but it has been almost quasi-finalized, so that's why I'm taking liberty on referring to it without the word draft in here. But I think that's an important thing to note as well. So as Alex has said, it's unrealistic to expect a system of economic account to necessarily and automatically yield a wholly satisfactory measure of welfare. And I think this limitation of the SNA in general and in the GDP measurement, as I said, has been recognized for a long time and for decades, as I had highlighted in the blind spots of the GDP. That doesn't mean that obviously the SNE cannot contribute. As a matter of fact, there are some important and valuable contributions coming from the 2025 System of National Accounts update, all right? And key among them are really the introduction of 3 new chapters relating to well-being and sustainability, including Chapter 2, Chapter 34, and Chapter 35. As we can see, And they include some very valuable discussion, for instance, of the concept of well-being and the various approaches methods to measure it and how extended accounts can support all of this. Same thing for the measuring of sustainability, where there is a valuable discussion on monitoring sustainability using the capital approach and what it does and does not measure as well. So these are key kind of conceptual contribution which are included in the 2025 SNA. And here I actually just have a kind of a quote from the NHA for chapter 34 on the well-being, as I mentioned, all right, where it highlights 4 aspects of most relevance in framing the measurement of well-being. The first one of them is the goods and service consumed by people as recorded of measures of household actual fine consumption. And that's obviously within the boundary, if you wish, of the SNA and the GDP. However, the 3 others are mentioned as clear examples, which are sometimes outside the scope of the SNA production. And I think that's important to recognize, and the fact that they are recognized in the language here by the SNA is also a good contribution, and it kind of opens the way for other measurements in that context. Having mentioned that, there is also 2 other new chapters on digitalization and globalization, which kind of also provide some discussion and some also focus on the recording of some recently emergent phenomena like digitalization, all right, and the free services, the crypto assets, which, as I said before, were also part of the blind spots recognized for the GDP measurement. Now, it's worth highlighting, as I said, that most of these contributions remain really, while they are extremely valuable, they are also remain in the kind of conceptual discussion phase and conceptual contribution. That doesn't take away from their value. I think they are extremely valuable. And I think, as we say, ultimately, only a limited number of conceptual changes in the 2025 SNA impact macroeconomic indicators. Some of them are here, the 5 kind of conceptual changes that impact, and some of them has a bearing actually, if you wish, in one way or the other on the beyond GDP, including the recording depletion of natural resources as a cost of production, which affects both the GDP/the NDP, which is the net domestic product, and also the recognition of data as a produced assets, and the renewable energy resources and adjustment in the treatment of biological resources, which affects the net worth. But I think a major contribution also, again, comes from the SNA to my mind here, which is really the focus again, or the renewed focus on the compilation of net income measures, which are strongly encouraged again in the 2025 SNA. The net domestic product is the gross domestic product, less the depletion, less the depreciation or the depletion in the case of natural resources, and thus it gives a better kind of really image of the production cost. And I think that's very important in moving forward. And as I say, this kind of new focus on the compilation of net income, I think it's a valuable contribution that has to be highlighted here as we move forward as well. Now, we move to the second pillar now, which is in the environment pillar, and to the system of environmental economic accounting, or SEA. All right. SEA has been adopted by the UN Statistical Commission in 2012, and then that was the system, that was the center framework of SEA, and then the ecosystem accounting of SEA has been adopted by the UN Statistical Commission in 2021. Let's note here that SEA actually the center framework has been adopted in 2012, which is exactly the same year where what is called in the policy area, the Rio +20, or the International Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio +20, has taken place, which was in itself a follow-up to what's called the Earth Summit, or the Rio Conference in 1992, which brought the Agenda 21 as an outcome document to the policy. And then after that, and the emphasis in 1992 was on kind of bringing, if you wish, the environmental sustainability and elevating it to as a pillar of sustainable development. While in 2012, there has been kind of going back, if you wish, to a balanced approach and an integrated approach among the three the three pillars of sustainable development. SEA came in that sense to meet really some very specific users' demand, as I said, since the Brundtland report and the Agenda 21 has been developed 20 years after this kind of very concrete calls from the users and the policy area to develop a measurement that would take into account and go beyond GDP on the environmental sustainability, and if you wish to address the negative externality in a concrete manner. So it does address the key blind spot of the GDP, and it also brings together environmental and economic data using the same accounting principles of the SNA. All right. So it was certainly a valuable contribution, and I think one of the most contributions and valuable aspects of SEA is that it does consider the natural capital and recognize it as an asset. In that sense, it provides the flows of benefits to the people and stocks that can be degraded, depleted, or enhanced, restored. So really, it recognizes something that has been known for centuries, I would say, which is our economic activity does depend on the natural capital and the importance of the interaction between the economic activity and the natural capital, and importantly, accounting for all this. So it is, as I say, important to assess the impacts and dependencies on the natural capital, which is not fully reflected in the GDP and the SNA. SEA, in that sense, also, I would say, is a very unique position, really, to contribute very positively and concretely to a beyond GDP agenda. All right. It provides an integrated set of accounts. It helps to inform several aspects related to the assessment of the impact of economic activities on the environment and the contribution of the environment to the economy. It monitors and assesses of actions to address climate change, including the government expenditures, for example, on climate change mitigation and adaptation, taxes and subsidies related to climate change, fossil fuel subsidies, and biodiversity. So really, it comes really with very concrete kind of contributions. All right. It also provides a powerful tool to analyze trade-offs of different policies, respond to growing focus on wealth, and opportunities to bring geospatial and statistical work together. And it provides a consistent framework for the derivation of indicators. Finally, it provides a basis to further analyze the interaction between the environment and social and demographic statistics. And I think that brings us as a good segue to the third pillar in this kind of contributions, which is the contributions and the potential contribution by the social and demographic statistics to the beyond GDP agenda. And on that aspect, the UN Statistical Commission has actually mandated a process which is the Friends of the Shared Group on Social and Demographic Statistics to count or reflect better, all right, society and its connections with the environment and the economy in line with the central promise of the 2030 Agenda and leaving no one behind. One of the things, obviously, that the social and demographic statistics brings to the table immediately is, as I said, the change of mindset and the change of narrative, if you say. So puts the people immediately at the center and the 2030 Agenda as a holistic and integrated approach of the sustainable development at the center of its thinking. To that end, a process actually has been initiated with 5 blocks. I don't know, maybe some of you has been following it, but there has been what's called sprints that has been initiated in that process with 4 main blocks: people at the center, relationship, places, and time. And obviously, a final sprint would be made to present the outcomes of this process as well. And I think the whole issue is really an attempt to advance research towards an overarching conceptual framework for social and demographic statistics, which would be important and an important contributions, obviously, if it is done to the beyond GDP agenda. And also it strengthens social and demographic statistics that better reflect society and its connections with the environment and the economy. So an integrated approach, again, in the thinking here would be key. So this slide, actually, again, it does present it capture what I have mentioned in terms of blind spots of the GDP at the beginning of the process. And we can see that many of the aspects and valuable aspects of well-being are outside really the production boundary of the GDP totally. And some of them could be in, but they are not accounted for. So, but more importantly, I think this slide really put an emphasis on the central role of time use statistics for complementing GDP. And that's one of the what I call low-hanging fruits, really, for the possible contributions of the social and demographic statistics to the beyond GDP agenda, given how valuable this time use data could be in terms of providing information to measure and value the unpaid household services work, evidence to monitor progress towards the sustainable development goals, but also can change the way we measure prosperity and progress and provide innovative ways to assess public policy. Now, the use of time use actually becomes actually more valuable if it's put, as we say, in a care system. And again, the care framework here or a care system would be much valuable contributions, again, to the beyond GDP coming from this pillar, if you wish. The care system, as we all know, it's a multidisciplinary. It goes through, it crosses through a lot of areas, including gender, human rights, education, health. There's been a wealth of research, as we know, on the care, including the care economy and so on. So it opens the way really for a rich research agenda, which is, and also a rich information which is available to bring together. And it kind of paved the way for hopefully a statistical framework for care, where a statistical standards and definitions obviously would be presenting as and identifying building blocks for such a system could be submitted. Care and time use measurements to complement GDP obviously would be a valuable contributions, and we can see in that case time use indicators, national time transfer accounts, satellite extended accounts, the nowcasting and forecasting. Many aspects of the time use and the care measurements would be valuable contributions to the GDP. Let me move now to what I said would be also a valuable experiment and a valuable contributions and mindset change coming from a sectoral approach. And this is a statistical framework for measuring the sustainability of tourism. That was an internationally agreed framework for measuring the economic, social, and environmental aspect of tourism, which has been adopted globally by the UN Statistical Commission in March 2024, and before that, obviously, by the UN Tourism General Assembly in October 2023. And I think it provides the main concept, definition, and data organization structure to guide the production of internationally comparable data on the sustainability of tourism at the global, national, and subnational levels. More importantly, really, I think what it brings is a change of mindsets in terms of going across the three pillars, all right, and submitting kind of an integrated thinking to the measurement of themes that are relevant to tourist policy and decisions, all right. And as we can see from the following, from this slide, some of these measurement themes are actually most pertinent. They are all response to the needs of the users in policymakers in the tourism sector, all right, but they have been identified carefully after a long consultations, all right, and we can see that, for instance, we can find ecosystem, biodiversities, water, energy in the environmental pillar, and we can find also issues of culture, perceptions, and other aspects in the social pillar, and obviously we can find the GDP and other and the establishments and the industries in the economic pillar. And what it does is that this kind of themes which are submitted in the framework are addressed again in terms of not only measurements, but integrated approach to measurements across the three pillars, which is an important change of mindsets in measuring the impacts and dependencies of tourism on the economy, society, and the environment. But it also goes through the space from global to local scales. So this framework has been tested. It has been piloted at 29 countries, actually, in a very concrete and dynamic way. And this is actually, if you wish, a demonstration of some of the pilot countries. But I think it's important to note that this pilot has been implemented in stepwise and modular approach, and that different pilots focus on implementing different parts of the framework and at different territorial scales as well, in line with the priorities and circumstances of each country. So I think it does provide this flexibility, and I think it's a good lesson in probably moving forward with a beyond GDP agenda. Finally, I would end with an example from the national level, which is coming from Bhutan. All right, for a long, long time, I think Bhutan has recognized, like many, the limitations of the GDP in measuring its quality of growth, if you wish. And they came up, obviously, with what is well known as the global, the Gross National Happiness Index in 1979, which really takes a holistic view of sustainable development. It was developed in a participatory and inclusive way. It does identify 9 domains which reflect the normative values embedded in the culture and traditions of Bhutan. And we can see a lot of them related, obviously, to the discussion of the beyond GDP absolutely now, including issues even of psychological well-being in terms of time use, education, good governance, etc., ecological diversity. And under each of these domains, some very specific themes are well identified, and related to them are 33 indicators under the 9 domains to provide a complete picture of the well-being. And more importantly, all this is related really to the need of the policymakers and the decision takers in terms as it forms a quantitative bedrock of national policy development, implementation, and monitoring. So I think that's really a good example of the change of mindsets, as I mentioned. And I think it would be important to keep this, that this is actually, we're not starting from scratch in moving with this agenda, but there is a wealth of measurement and a wealth of potential contributions from the statistical community, including also at the sectoral level, but also at the national level. So I thank you. And I will stop here, Alex, and up to you. Alex, you're muted, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Amr, for this great presentation. I would like maybe now, before we open up the floor for questions, live questions, maybe I will also give Stefan a chance to say a few words, and then we can take questions from the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Alex, and in particular, thank you for organizing this. I mean, the most important thing we do at the UN Statistics Division in New York is building a global statistical community, and we do that at all levels. When we meet as a statistical commission, it's the bosses of all the countries. When we meet at this level, it's interested and dedicated people from around the world, and I wanted to thank you for doing that. And to thank everybody for connecting. We are in the high 90s here, so that's a testimony of the interest. No, Amr made a fantastic presentation. It's complicated. It's been going on for a long time. But the good news is we have already a lot of work already invested in different areas that we can build upon. So I'm curious to see some of the questions. It's also not an easy problem to solve. I don't expect that this will come very, very quickly. Rome wasn't built overnight. The original GDP was not invented overnight. It took many, many years to implement it. And one of the most important words. The resolution and the Summit of the Future is, of course, a highly political process. They don't ask statisticians, not even the director of the statistics division, to sit at the table and tell them what to do. This is political. But there were three words in that resolution that are dear to me and important. Number one, it's the measure has to be universal. That's what we do in the global statistical community and at the UN Statistics Division. We measure things in a way so that we can compare, aggregate, understand, learn from each other. So these measures have to be universal, applicable to everybody. They have to be country owned. That's the second word. It's not something that is calculated by some smart people in a dark room somewhere on the planet, but everybody owns it and they calculate it. That's the strength of GDP. That will take time, that will take investment. That is not something that politicians and users like to hear, but I think we need to defend that because it's, of course, an important element of sustainability. If we all as a global community own what comes out of this process, then I think there's a good chance that this will stand for quite a long time. And the third thing I'm happy about in the resolution it makes reference to the Statistical Commission that gives us a seat at the table. And I always talk about a ping pong game between the users and the producers of information. The users they have a voracious appetite. They want all kinds of information. And the producers, of course, we, the data community, we can only produce certain things given our resources and our knowledge. So I think it has to be a back and forth so that we come up with something that is solid in terms of measurement and production, but it's also relevant so that it satisfies the appetite of the users. And I'm sure in some of the questions that we will get, there may be some examples from people who have dealt with users at the national level. I'll stop here and I'm curious to see what the questions are. Thank you for your interest.
Thanks so much. Yeah, this is a call for to everyone to please raise your hand if you have a question. You can also type it into the chat, but it's nicer if maybe you ask the question live. And I see already two colleagues have their hand up. First, Michael, please come in and also let us know where you work and ask your question. Please. You should be able to unmute yourself. Maybe doesn't work. Maybe we go with Habib first and then we come back to Michael.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amr, for this very interesting presentation, and thanks for sharing all this work that is being done at the global level with us. I think this is definitely one of the most important things we are doing currently, and it's interesting, like what you mentioned. It's that GDP was never supposed to be a measure of well-being, right? So this is true, but yet this was used as a measure of well-being. Because I guess there's this strong appeal to use like one number, which will represent progress, right? So in a way, what we are trying to do here is not really something beyond GDP, but basically addressing a need or addressing something that was mistaken. What GDP was mistaken for. So creating a measure for what GDP was mistaken for. And something I wanted to hear from you is that some of the components, some of the concepts here goes beyond the realm of statistics or economics, right? So the slide you presented with the 6 components, so the 3 process components and 3 outcome components, right? They basically, it encompasses the entire stock of human knowledge per se. Like, so I guess with industrialization, what has happened is that we have because to develop expertise and specialization, we have kind of fragmented our knowledge, right? And this worked, like it works for some purposes. For others, it creates a problem, which we are facing right now. For example, I saw like many concepts in those components in the process and inputs. We actually need to find like an agreed definition and agreed understanding for all of us. For example, well-being, right? I think we're still discussing what is well-being. Bhutan has, their a way of measuring, which is very interesting. I guess if I look at, say, the field of psychology, they have there is a very famous framework by a psychologist called Abraham Maslow, who has like a hierarchy of who proposed like a hierarchy of human needs, which has like 8 levels of human needs. At the very bottom is the physiological need. So we need to eat, we need to sleep, all those things. The next level is safety. And if you just continue going up, the highest level is self-actualization and then transcendence, right? So I guess from a psychological point of view, somewhere in the hierarchy is the threshold for well-being. And what's interesting is that in that hierarchy, in that pyramid, there are some of the levels which we actually measure in statistics. For example, the physiological needs, we actually measure. We measure hunger, right? The second level, we also measured. So my question is, are we talking to like a very wide range of expertise in defining this framework? So going to have a measure beyond GDP, are we also talking to expertise beyond statisticians and economists? Thank you.
Thank you, Habib. Let me call again also on Michael, and maybe then we take those 2 questions. Michael, can you please try to unmute yourself again? Well, he seems to have a technical problem. I will just read out what you have written in the chat, and then maybe we can address those 2 questions. So Michael wrote, it seems to me that we need something on human outcomes complementary to GDP with the same focus as the SNA plus, which means the formal economy plus unpaid and informal work. The economic drivers of well-being, I suggest the economic drivers of well-being. I suggest the extent to which everyone's basic needs are met, meaning leave no one behind. And so maybe we go with those 2 questions first, and then we continue. Thank you.
Shall I try my hand, Stefan? All right. No, thank you very much for this question, and thank you, Habibur, for this. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, of course, yes, GDP was not intended to measure the welfare, and it theoretically never pretended to do that. But let's also realize, and it depends obviously on what the user, the policymakers and the decision takers have done in a way and had used GDP with. But let's acknowledge also that the whole kind of global systems has been put in place to value and overvalue GDP as a measurement of progress. All right. If you look, for instance, to the financial institutions, all right, if you don't achieve economic growth at a certain level, this is kind of like you are penalized. You are penalized not only by the institution, but you are penalized by the market as well. All right. So that's one, if you wish. So other systems are put for the same kind of mindset, as I say, to overvalue economic growth without looking at the quality of that growth and really the well-being of the people and the distributional dimensions and so on and so forth. So this has been changing, but the main establishment and how the systems were built, all right, are really kind of put in terms of the policy and politics to kind of overvalue and use GDP as, if you wish, a main measurement of progress. Now, is that the foot of GDP? One could argue, no, of course. It's like we argue about technology. It's the use of the technology. Is it good or bad? The technology is there. All right. But I think we had reached now a mindset, hopefully, and a turning point where, as you said, we can really think beyond this and really kind of measure what we value as a universal society and a global society. Now, you are absolutely right. I have to say that this is beyond really the statisticians. All right. As a matter of fact, as we saw, for instance, in the setting of the 2030 agenda and the SDG, a policy framework has to come first to guide this. And I think what this kind of the LG proposals at least put on the table is to try to, through this independent high-level panel, is to narrow kind of what could be called as come up with a facilitate the political and policy negotiations on a policy framework or ultimately a value dashboard that would constitute really and kind of guide what set of metrics we would need. Now, it is recognized, as we say, that this will go across the pillars. It's in the mandate, so it has obviously to value more a lot of the aspects and themes and measurement themes that has not been measured, whether related to well-being, to sustainability, to other aspects, as I had mentioned at the beginning. But this choice is obviously, to my mind, will not come from the statistician. I think the statisticians will have a valuable contribution. And I really don't think the challenge of the Beyond GDP is going to come from the measurement issues. As a matter of fact, it will really come from agreeing on a value system that would guide the Beyond GDP moving forward, that universally we can agree on. I was in touch with some think tanks that some of them has collected more than 400 indicators related to the ecosystems. All right. So I don't think there is a lack of indicators. I don't think there is a lack of metrics. All right. I think pulling all this together with that meets an agreed universal user's needs, all right, would be the critical challenge in this process to be fair. And I think, yes, the intention for the composition of the high-level expert group of the LG is that it is going to be, of course, constituted from various contributors. The statisticians will have to be on the table, of course, and will have to be a kind of an input, a valuable input. But yes, there is going to be from the development policy, there is going to be environmental scientists, there is going to be a wide range of expertise, which is expected to be at the highest level on this panel. So that maybe would be my response to that aspect. On the question of focus on market, yeah, the measurement of outcomes is an important approach, and I think one of the and as it has been said, and as Habib also has pointed out, one of the attraction of the GDP is its simplicity. All right, we kind of like as human beings to oversimplify things, but the fact of the matter is that sustainable development is not a simple thing. I mean, to have the right policy choices, all right, and to make implied judgments and offsetting kind of decisions has to be made. And I think this is where the contributions of the statistical community and really can come in terms, and systems like the environmental economic accounting could come, as I said, in terms of really highlighting for the policymakers the trade-offs between different policy choices. And kind of really, there is always going to be trade-offs as we move forward. The measurement of outcomes is an approach that has been put on the table. I think one of the challenges is how we can reach simplicity in the final kind of measurement that we give to the policymakers in that aspect. But I will yield to Stefan on both questions, obviously, and if he wants kindly to complement what I've said.
No, thank you. I've been communicating about this a lot, so I mean, I have also perhaps learned to communicate a couple of very simple points. GDP bashing, I'm not a very big friend and I'm not very tolerant. I mean, GDP was invented for what it was invented, and I like to call it a big success story of the United Nations because we built the capacity of all countries around the world to measure it. And that was perhaps also the problem because we had numbers for every country, and that's why everybody started using it. But I always say, if you're trying to eat your soup with a fork and it doesn't work, it's not the fault of the fork. It's because you as a user are using the wrong instrument. And so GDP and beyond has something to do a lot with educating users and trying to explain to them, having a good conversation with the numbers that we produce, how they can actually be used. The second important point is, of course, the human tendency of trying to simplify everything. Everybody wants to have one number. Politicians have an attention span of 5 seconds. So to describe a country, they give you one number, GDP. But I trust people. I mean, if you buy a car, you don't just ask one number. You are capable at the human level to digest quite a number of numbers. I mean, how fast does the car drive? How expensive is it? How much does it cost me to pay insurance and so on and so forth. So I think when we take decisions on a day-to-day level, we all deal with the vectors, and we know that they are competing because the better the car is, the more expensive it is. So we have to make evaluation. So I quite believe in the capability of humans to digest dashboards and so on and so forth. It is complicated because, I mean, what we're trying to do here is to answer the question. If you meet an old friend that you haven't seen for many years and they ask you, how are you? What do you answer? Do you say, I am $11,212. This is my income? No, you don't. I mean, you tell a story about how healthy you are, how happy you are, how your family is, how your children are being educated, and so on and so forth. And of course, your economic well-being is one of the underlying factors, but it's only one of many. So I think this is complicated because also it entails some elements of subjectivity, and Habib was referring to this in the pyramid. The higher up you go in the pyramid, the more subjective is your perception of your own well-being. And that may be difficult to measure globally and in a comparable way from one culture to another. So it is complicated, but I'm actually quite optimistic that number one, we do have a lot of groundwork that we can build upon. Number two, this is a broad discussion. And if we bring, as you rightly say, the right people to the table to have the discussion, I think we'll make a lot of progress.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, Amr. I would like to ask again the attendees, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I can go to the questions in the chat. But I see, okay, Manuel, you want to come in? Please go ahead. You're still muted. Yes.
Am I?
Go ahead. Yes, good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. My question also or observation is kind of like simple. It's kind of like rudimentary actually, but maybe I like to be rudimentary. But every time I look back on a situation which indicators, numbers, measures are discussed, the discussion takes way too long, to my liking. Maybe there's a reason to hear everybody, there's a reason to cover everything, and then we find ourselves constrained, like, okay, we want something simple, but yet we want to put everything like a carbon and then water and then health and then income, and then so we end up not having anything, again, one thing that covers it all. I remember when you guys were discussing the indicator for SDGs, and before that, when you guys were discussing the indicator for MDGs, and then the other elements that showed up on the Rio Plus 20, we seem not to have a platform that allow us to move quickly. And this beyond GDP is a wonderful, beautiful idea for us to demonstrate this simplification while addressing that thing. The only problem we have, we're trying to be good for everything. So I don't know. Maybe you guys are a good team of scientists to propose a few simple ones that we could be using, and then allow maybe variations across the desires of having, including whatever culture is proposing to have in a country. But I can already see that this is going to take us many years for us to come to something that's very, very important as complementing the GDP. You know, when the poverty index, the multidimensional poverty index came around, and then came the other, well, it's another sequence, the human development, and then multidimensional poverty, and all these other elements that came around. And I expected that probably a framework will come up and say, like, okay, we as UN, we report on these 5, and then we allow countries to do the rest on the others. And then we move from that point forward. But then every time something, the discussion come back when we are in the same dilemma. That's my observation. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Manuel. You want to comment on that, Stefan or Amr?
Oh, I quickly. I like simple and practical, absolutely. And I am a little bit worried as we are having a fantastic discussion on the very broad spectrum of what we mean by well-being, progress, and sustainability, that we will end up with a very long shopping list, and that's not good for our purpose of reflecting the world in simple, understandable terms. So I hope that in our discussions with users, we will be able to convince them that yes, while we need more than one number, the world is a little bit more complicated than just one number. We don't need 7,512. So that's why we were able to even convince the Secretary General to talk about a dashboard of not more than 15 or 20 indicators and so on and so forth, because there is a dimension of capacity building then afterwards, because we have to go, it's not only the methodological philosophical debate of defining concepts, then we have to go and implement that in 193 United Nations member countries. So this is a lot of work to do. So I totally agree with you that we should do it quick and simple. We should also leave some flexibility to add on a core set for countries, whatever is culturally important in their part of the world. But the core has to be universal and comparable globally, but then you can add to it. That's absolutely fine. That's the principle. And we may have to develop the same thing as we do in national accounts. I mean, the whole GDP for country takes about a year or two to calculate, but we have early indicators for the quick feeling of the pulse, because politicians don't want to wait a year or two until we have all the final numbers. We as statisticians have been smart enough to develop systems by which we have solid long-term measures, but at the same time also some kind of early warning indicators. So I think a similar system could be imagined for the beyond GDP.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
May I, Alex?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Please
no,
go
no, I think, no, I think I would totally second, obviously, what Stefan has said. I don't think that, and having discussed with some users, I don't think there is any appetite to kind of overburden at this stage countries, all right, or national statistical offices with kind of new complex kind of either data collection or kind of overburdening them with new complicated tools of measurements and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned, I think really the core here is not going to be a measurement. It's going to be what to measure. All right. So I think really the agreement on what to measure, which has to come user-driven, if you wish, would be a challenge, which is, again, in the policy domain and in the political domain and in the politics domain and so on. But I think the statistical community has proven in its response to through the SDG indicator framework that it is quite capable of handling kind of political kind of guidance or requests in a very efficient manner, but I don't think there is an appetite to replicate this at this stage. So I think that's an important point to mention here, and I think I will stop here. So
thanks. I know we are already a little bit over time, but maybe we can take one more question from the floor, and I'm also sure that we will come back to this topic in another webinar at some point. But maybe one last question. I see Marina Manke has her hand up. Please, Marina, if you want to come in.
Absolutely. Hello, colleagues. Great to be connecting. A bit of deja vu. Just finalized the development of set of limited indicators on measuring progress on Global Compact for migration. Worked together with the population division team. Lots of lessons learned. Stefan, colleagues, really we have been following the discussions around beyond GDP. For us, migration is I understand, is a side topic for such a huge ecosystem, what we are looking to define, but absolutely relevant for almost all of those dimensions. Just confirming our interest to stay in touch. You know, if you set up a working group, smaller discussions, really extremely interested to ensure that we transfer our lessons from another initiative just finished, as well as supporting this very interesting process of really informing and defining the new way how we measure the world, and spotlight on the human dimension of it. And migrants are human. So just looking forward to hearing on next steps, Alex, also, you know, after this discussion. Thank you for the organization. Over.
Yes, thanks so much. So this was more a comment than a question, of course, and I think Stefan and Amr have taken note of it. So we will, of course, make sure that we include all the relevant stakeholders in the process. Yeah, maybe we stop here with the questions, and if you can now, please unmute yourself and maybe switch the camera on for a few seconds, and then join me in giving Amr and Stefan a big round of applause for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much. Yes, as I said, so this will surely not be the last webinar on this topic of beyond GDP. We will continue to follow up on this. And as one of our colleagues who have registered for this webinar has mentioned in the registration form, make it simple. That was maybe one of the best and shortest comments on the topic. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will share the recording and the slides on the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians. Thank you, and join us again next time. Thanks.
Thank you for connecting.
Thank you very much.
Greetings around
Thank
the
you
world.
all.
Bye.
Same to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.